the complete story of Aka Manto, Japan's most terrifying toilet spirit. There are places in this world where the veil between the living and the dead grows thin. Doorways, crossroads, mirrors. But in Japan, one of the most feared liminal spaces exists in the most mundane of locations. A place we all must visit, alone and vulnerable. A place where, in the fading light of late afternoon, something waits in the last stall. Something that will ask you a question, and your answer will determine whether you leave that bathroom alive. This is the story of Aka Manto, the Red Cloak, and once you hear his question, it may already be too late. Part 1. The Threshold of Fear. Imagine yourself as a student in Japan. The school day has stretched long past its usual hours. Perhaps you stayed late for club activities, or maybe you've been held back to finish an assignment. The hallways have grown quiet. Most of your classmates have gone home. The sun hangs low in the sky, casting long shadows through the windows. And you realize, with growing urgency, that you need to use the bathroom. The nearest restroom is one you normally avoid. It sits at the far end of the building, separated from the main corridors. It's older than the modern facilities near the cafeteria. The tiles are cracked. The lights flicker. Some of the stalls still have the old-style squat toilets that most schools have replaced. Students whisper about this bathroom. They say things happen there. They say someone died there once, though the details change with each telling. But your need is urgent, and you have no choice. You push open the door. It creaks on rusty hinges. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead, their glow sickly and pale. The air smells of old pipes and chemical cleaners that can't quite mask something underneath, something older. You count the stalls. 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth stall. You remember, suddenly, that the number 4 in Japanese, shi, sounds exactly like the word for death. A coincidence that feels less innocent in this moment. You choose a different stall. The second one, perhaps. Anything but the fourth. You enter. You lock the door. And as you sit there, in that moment of complete vulnerability, you realize something. There is no toilet paper. Not a single sheet. You check again, hoping you missed it somehow, but the dispenser is completely empty. Your heart sinks. You're about to call out, to ask if anyone else is there who might help, when you hear it. A voice. Soft at first, almost pleasant. A male voice, though you cannot see anyone. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. From the walls, from the pipes, from the space beneath the door. And it asks you a question that has been asked in Japanese school bathrooms for nearly a century. Red paper or blue paper? This is Aka Manto, and now you must choose. Part 2. The Crimson Choice. The legend of Aka Manto is precise in its horror. There is no ambiguity in what happens next. If you answer red paper, your fate is sealed in the most visceral way imaginable. The accounts vary slightly in the specific mechanism of your death, but they all agree on the outcome. You will be covered in red. In some versions, Aka Manto himself appears, a tall figure draped in a flowing red cloak that pools on the floor like spilled paint. His face is hidden behind a white mask, smooth and expressionless, like the masks worn in traditional No theater. His hands, when they emerge from beneath the cloak, hold a blade. Some say it's a knife. Others describe it as something sharper, more surgical. A scalpel, perhaps, or razor wire. The exact tool doesn't matter as much as what he does with it. In other versions, the method is less specific, but no less brutal. You are simply stabbed, repeatedly, until your body has bled so profusely that your clothing, your skin, everything appears red. The bathroom floor becomes a mirror of scarlet. The walls are painted with arterial spray. And when they find you, hours or days later, you are wearing red from head to toe. You chose red paper, and Aka Manto ensured you got exactly what you asked for. But perhaps, in that frozen moment when the voice asks its question, you think you're clever. Perhaps you remember the stories. You know that choosing red means death by exsanguination. So you choose the other option. You say, with what you hope is confidence, blue paper. This, you will discover, is not survival. It is simply a different death. Part 3. The Azure Ending. Choosing blue paper brings a fate that is, if anything, more terrifying because of its intimacy. When you answer blue, Aka Manto does not cut you. There is no blade. Instead, there are hands. Sometimes they are his hands, emerging from behind you, wrapping around your throat. Sometimes they rise from the toilet itself, pale arms reaching up from the water, fingers closing around your neck with inhuman strength. The strangling begins immediately. Those hands tighten, cutting off your air, pressing against your windpipe with methodical precision. You struggle, of course. Your own hands claw at the arms holding you, trying to pry them loose, but it's like fighting marble. The grip does not loosen. If anything, it intensifies. Your lungs begin to burn. You try to scream, but no sound comes. Only a thin, desperate wheeze. Your vision begins to narrow. The edges go dark first, a creeping shadow that closes in from all sides. Your face, starved of oxygen, begins to change color. Pink fades to purple. Purple deepens to blue. Your lips turn the color of bruises. Your fingernails go gray. And still those hands hold tight, patient and merciless. In some variations, the method differs, but the result is the same. Instead of strangulation, all of the blood is drained from your body. Every drop. It's pulled from your veins through some supernatural suction, leaving your corpse pale and withered. Your skin takes on a bluish tint, like ice or deep water. The coldness of death settles over you quickly. You become blue as thoroughly as the red chooser becomes crimson. When they find your body, you are slumped in the stall, your face turned upward, eyes wide and bulging, tongue protruding slightly. Your skin has the unmistakable blue-gray pallor of asphyxiation. If asked what happened, the cause of death would be listed as strangulation or suffocation, but there would be no explanation for how. No marks on your throat that match human fingers. No evidence of a struggle beyond your own desperate scratching at invisible attackers. Just you, alone, in a locked stall, dead and blue. Part 4. The Illusion of Escape. Perhaps you think you're smarter than those who came before. Perhaps you've heard enough versions of the legend to know that both red and blue lead to death. So when Aka Manto asks his question, you decide to outsmart him. You'll choose neither. You'll ask for a different color entirely. Yellow paper, you say, or perhaps green or white. Any color but the two he offered. For a moment, there is silence. You dare to hope that you've broken the spell, that by refusing to play by his rules, you've won. Then, you hear it. A sound like grinding stone, like the earth itself opening. The floor beneath the toilet begins to crack. Hairline fractures spread across the tiles, widening into fissures. And from those cracks, something reaches up. In one particularly specific variation, if you choose yellow paper, the punishment is more immediate and more humiliating. Aka Manto appears, and with supernatural strength, he grabs your head and forces it down into the toilet bowl, down into the water. And he holds you there, your face submerged, until your lungs fill with water and you drown. The yellow you chose manifests in the most degrading way possible. Drowned in a toilet, found with your head in the bowl, face down in filth. Even in death, you are denied dignity. Other attempts at cleverness fare no better. Some stories tell of students who brought their own toilet paper, thinking to avoid the question entirely. But when they reached for it, the paper vanished, simply disappeared from their hands, or was never in their pockets to begin with, though they clearly remembered putting it there. Aka Manto's question cannot be avoided through preparation. The moment you enter that stall, the rules of the world change. Normal cause and effect no longer applies. You are in his domain now, and he will have his answer. There is, in most versions, only one way to survive an encounter with Aka Manto. When he asks his question, you must refuse both options. I don't need any paper, you say, or simply, no thank you. This rejection, spoken calmly and with finality, breaks his power over you. The voice stops, the presence withdraws, and you have just enough time, just a few precious seconds, to flee. You don't walk, you run. You burst from the stall, from the bathroom, and you don't stop running until you're far away, surrounded by other people, back in the safety of numbers and witnesses. But even this escape comes with a cost. Those who survive encounters with Aka Manto rarely speak of it without a tremor in their voice. Many avoid public bathrooms for the rest of their lives. Some develop phobias that therapists struggle to treat. And in certain versions of the legend, even those who escape are not truly safe. The story follows them. They tell someone what happened, and within days or weeks, they fall mysteriously ill. A fever that doctors cannot explain. Exhaustion that sleep does not cure. Some die from this illness. Others recover, but are never quite the same. As if the act of speaking the story aloud was itself a curse, a way for Aka Manto to finish what he started. So now, you understand the rules. Red means blood. Blue means suffocation. Any other color means damnation. And refusal means flight. These are the parameters of the legend that has terrified Japanese school children for nearly 100 years. But where did this legend come from? What gave birth to Aka Manto? To understand that, we must travel back in time, to an era of growing anxiety and changing society. We must go back to the 1930s. Part 4. The Birth of a Legend. The story of Aka Manto begins, as far as we can determine, in the 1930s. The exact year is lost to the imperfect memory of oral tradition, but folklorist Matthew Meyer has documented schoolyard rumors about Aka Manto dating back to at least 1935. This makes it one of Japan's oldest documented urban legends, predating the famous Hanako-san by approximately 2 decades. The Japan of the 1930s was a nation in transition. Modernization was accelerating. Cities were growing. Old ways were colliding with new technologies. For many Japanese citizens, particularly children, this was an era of increasing pressure and anxiety. The education system was becoming more rigorous and competitive. Expectations were rising. And in this climate of stress, something emerged from the collective unconscious. A story that captured all the fear and helplessness that children felt when faced with impossible choices and inescapable consequences. According to one theory, the legend began in an elementary school in Osaka around 1935. There was a rumor, passed from student to student, that a man in a cloak would appear in a dimly lit clog box in the school's basement. A clog box was a storage area for outdoor shoes, a transition space between inside and outside, another liminal threshold. The man would wait there in the shadows, and any child who ventured too close would simply disappear. This story spread through Osaka's schools like wildfire. Children who had never been afraid of the basement suddenly refused to go down there. Parents complained. Teachers tried to reassure them that it was just a story. But the story didn't stop. It evolved. Within a year or two, it had spread to Tokyo. And as it traveled, it changed. The man moved from the clog box to the bathroom. His cloak became specifically red. And most importantly, he began to ask his terrible question. The legend had found its final form. It would continue to spread throughout Japan over the next several years. By 1940, it had reached as far as Kitakyushu in the south. Japanese school children living in the Korean peninsula under Japanese rule whispered about Aka Manto in their own classrooms. The legend had become national, woven into the fabric of childhood fear across the entire country. But why specifically the 1930s? Why did this legend emerge when it did? One answer lies in the language itself. In the 1930s, the word manto referred to a specific type of garment, a sleeveless kimono-style jacket. It was fashionable at the time, particularly among young men. So when early versions of the story described Aka Manto, the red-clothed man, listeners would have pictured someone in contemporary dress, someone who could be real, someone who might actually be hiding in their school. This grounded the supernatural in the mundane, making it more immediate and more frightening. As the decades passed and language evolved, manto came to mean a longer, flowing cloak or cape in modern Japanese. This linguistic shift changed how different generations visualized Aka Manto. Older people, hearing the legend in the 1930s and 40s, pictured a man in a short red jacket. Their grandchildren, hearing the same story in the 1970s and 80s, imagined a figure in a dramatic red cape, something more theatrical and ghostly. The legend adapted to the language of its time, ensuring its continued relevance across generations. But the 1930s were significant for another reason. This was a time of growing authoritarianism in Japan. The military was gaining power. Dissent was being suppressed. Citizens, including children, were being expected to conform, to follow rules without question, to make sacrifices for the greater good. The education system reflected these values, becoming increasingly strict and demanding. Students faced relentless pressure to perform, to excel, to bring honor to their families. And there was very little outlet for the anxiety this created. In this context, we can read Aka Manto as a manifestation of that anxiety. He represents the nightmare of impossible expectations. He asks you a question to which every answer is wrong. No matter what you choose, you will be punished. This mirrors the feeling many students experienced regarding their exams, their social obligations, their entire lives. They were being asked questions they couldn't answer. They were being given choices that all led to suffering. Aka Manto, in his red cloak, asking his terrible question, embodies that psychological torture. Consider also the specific location of the legend. Aka Manto haunts bathrooms, particularly school bathrooms, particularly old and isolated ones. Bathrooms are unique spaces. They are the one place in a school where a child can be truly alone. No teachers watching, no classmates judging. Just you, behind a locked door, in a moment of private vulnerability. It's one of the few places where the rigid social structure of Japanese school life temporarily dissolves. And it's in that moment of solitude that Aka Manto appears, as if to say, even here, even in your most private moment, you are not safe from judgment. Even here, you will be tested. Even here, your choices will have consequences. This reading of the legend helps explain its enduring power. Aka Manto isn't just a scary story. He's a psychological mirror. He reflects the deepest anxieties of the culture that created him. And as long as those anxieties exist, as long as students feel the pressure of impossible expectations, Aka Manto will continue to wait in that last stall, ready to ask his question. But there's another layer to the origin of this legend, another possible source, one that involves not folklore or psychology, but actual murder. To understand this connection, we need to examine a dark chapter in Japanese criminal history. We need to talk about the Blue Blanket Murders. Part 5. The Blue Blanket Butcher. On the night of February 11th, 1906, in the port town of Mikuni in Fukui Prefecture, a snowstorm was raging. It was National Foundation Day, a holiday, and most people were safe inside their homes. At around 9 in the evening, there came a knock on the door of a shipping supply store owned by a 30-year-old man named Kaga Murakichi. When the door was opened, standing there in the swirling snow was a figure so strange that everyone who saw him remembered the details for the rest of their lives. The man wore a thick blue blanket draped over his entire body and head, obscuring his features completely. He held a lantern, its light barely penetrating the heavy snowfall. When he spoke, his voice was male, likely that of someone between 30 and 35 years old, but his face remained hidden beneath the blanket. No one recognized his voice. He told Kaga Murakichi a disturbing story. There was a place in the next village, he said. His grandmother had suddenly collapsed. She was dying. She needed help immediately. Would Kaga Murakichi come? Some time passed, perhaps an hour. The man in the blue blanket came back a third time. Now he asked for Kaga Murakichi's wife, Tsuo, who was 25 years old. The family was needed, he claimed. All of them. Tsuo prepared to leave. But then, the stranger made one more request. He wanted to take the couple's 2-year-old daughter as well. At this point, a neighbor who had been watching the children intervened. Something about the situation felt wrong. The stranger's insistence, the way he kept his face hidden, the fact that no one had returned yet. The neighbor refused to hand over the child. The man in the blue blanket argued briefly, then disappeared back into the storm. That saved the little girl's life. She would be the only survivor of that terrible night. The next morning, February 12th, a carpenter on his way to work crossed Shimbo Bridge. The storm had passed, leaving everything covered in fresh, white snow. But on the bridge, the carpenter saw something that made his blood run cold. There, in the center of the bridge, was a massive bloodstain, bright red against pristine white. The wooden railing was broken, splintered outward as if something heavy had been thrown through it. But there was no body, just blood and broken wood. The carpenter ran to alert the police. When they arrived and examined the scene, they determined that the amount of blood was not survivable for one person, let alone 3. Someone, possibly multiple people, had been killed on this bridge. The bodies had then been thrown into the river below. A search began immediately. Police combed the waterways around Mikuni, fighting against the current and the winter cold. On the same day, they found a small wooden boat moored along the Takeda River, near the Murakichi family home. Its sides were smeared with blood. Following the river downstream, police discovered the first body. It was Tsuo, Kaga Murakichi's young wife. She had been brutally murdered before being dumped in the water. 2 days later, on February 14th, searchers found Kiku's body in the Kuzuryu River estuary, another murder victim. As for Kaga Murakichi himself, he was never found. The doctor who examined the blood on the bridge concluded that the volume was too great for one person to lose and survive. Kaga Murakichi had almost certainly died on that bridge, and his body had been washed out to sea. 3 people murdered in a single night, an entire family destroyed, and all by a man whose face no one ever saw. A man known only as the Blue Blanket Murderer. The investigation continued for years, but the killer was never caught. In 1921, the statute of limitations expired, and the case was officially closed. In 1926, a 49-year-old man named Jinzaburo confessed to the crimes, but his confession was dismissed by police. He was a known liar and career criminal. His story had numerous inconsistencies. If his motive was robbery, why had nothing been stolen from the Murakichi household? Why had he attempted to take the 2-year-old child? His confession was likely an attempt to gain notoriety, nothing more. The true identity of the Blue Blanket Murderer remains unknown to this day, making it one of Japan's oldest and most chilling unsolved cases. Now, you might be wondering what this has to do with Aka Manto. After all, the Blue Blanket murders happened in 1906, and Aka Manto doesn't appear in the folklore record until the 1930s. That's a gap of nearly 3 decades. But oral traditions have long memories, especially when the story is sufficiently terrifying. The Blue Blanket case would have been famous throughout Japan. Newspapers covered it extensively. Based on how such cases were typically used in that era, parents likely used it to warn children about strangers. And then, nearly 30 years later, a new story began to spread through Japanese schools. A story about a man in a colored cloak, appearing in places children frequent, asking questions, and murdering those who give the wrong answer. The parallels are notable. Some versions of Aka Manto explicitly take place outside bathrooms, in streets and alleys, and involve the spirit kidnapping children, particularly young girls. In these tellings, he lures them away with false stories about sick relatives, remarkably similar to the Blue Blanket Murderer's methods. The cloak color changed from blue to red, which could imply a deliberate shift to make the legend more visually striking, more tied to blood and violence. But the core story pattern remained the same. A concealed predator, a false premise, a series of horrible deaths. Based on these similarities, some researchers have theorized that Aka Manto could be, at its root, a folkloric evolution of the Blue Blanket murders. The true crime gradually transformed into supernatural legend, the way so many real horrors do. The man became a spirit. His blanket became a cloak. His random selection of victims became a methodical ritual of questions and choices. But the fundamental fear remained the same. There is someone out there, someone whose face you cannot see, who wants to hurt you. And there is nothing you can do to stop him. You can only hope you're not the one he chooses next. This connection between Aka Manto and the Blue Blanket murders remains a matter of scholarly debate. However, multiple Japanese folklore researchers have noted the timing, the cultural impact, and most tellingly, the fact that some of the earliest variations of Aka Manto don't mention bathrooms at all. They feature a red-cloaked figure on the streets, approaching children and asking them questions. It's only later that the legend becomes specifically associated with school toilets. This progression suggests a gradual migration of the story from public spaces to more private ones, a process that took decades. Whether or not the Blue Blanket murders directly inspired Aka Manto, they certainly contributed to the cultural atmosphere that made such a legend possible. They proved that real monsters exist, that someone could walk through a snowstorm, knock on your door, tell you a believable lie, and lead you to your death. And if that could happen in reality, then the collective imagination might transform it into supernatural form as well. The unsolved nature of the case, the man who was never caught, could have evolved into a spirit that still wears his concealing cloak, still targeting the vulnerable. And that's one of the most unsettling aspects of Aka Manto. He might not be entirely fictional. He might be rooted, however distantly, in actual violence, in real suffering, in unsolved murders and unpunished killers. The legend is scary enough on its own, but the possibility that it began with truth makes it something else entirely. It transforms it from mere fiction into a warning. Part 6. The Ancient Roots. But the Blue Blanket murders, as influential as they may have been, are not the only source material for Aka Manto. To truly understand this legend, we need to dig deeper. We need to look at much older traditions, because long before anyone heard of Aka Manto, long before the 1930s or even the 1906 murders, there were other spirits haunting Japanese bathrooms. And these ancient yokai left their mark on the modern legend in ways that are impossible to ignore. Let us begin with Kainade, sometimes called Kainaze. This is a yokai that appears in legends from Kyoto, dating back centuries. Kainade is, at its essence, a hand that lives in toilets. Specifically, it inhabits traditional Japanese squat toilets, the kind that are basically holes in the floor connected directly to a pit below. When someone squats over one of these toilets to do their business, Kainade's hand reaches up from the darkness below. It's described as hairy, pale, with abnormally long fingers. And it touches you. It strokes your bottom with its cold, clammy palm. This is deeply unsettling, obviously, but Kainade is not actually malevolent. It's more mischievous than murderous. The touch is unwanted and violating, but it doesn't harm you physically. It's the kind of yokai that exists to make you uncomfortable, to remind you that even in your most private moments, the supernatural world is very close. However, there is a way to prevent Kainade from appearing. Before you squat over the toilet, you're supposed to ask a question. Red paper or white paper? Does that sound familiar? It should. This is almost exactly what Aka Manto asks, with one color changed from white to blue. And when you ask this question to prevent kainade, the yokai leaves you alone. It doesn't even appear. The words themselves act as a protective charm. Some versions of the tradition specify that kainade only appears on February 3rd during the Setsubun festival, a time when the boundary between the human and spirit worlds is particularly thin. On that day, you must be especially careful to ask the question before using an old toilet, or you might feel that horrible, invasive touch. The connection between kainade and Aka Manto is so obvious that many researchers believe one directly inspired the other. The question is nearly identical. The location is the same. Even some of the consequences are similar. In certain versions of Aka Manto, if you choose red or white paper, a tongue or hand emerges from the toilet. A red tongue that licks you from below, or a white hand that fondles you, just like kainade. These variations blend the two legends together, suggesting they share a common origin or have influenced each other heavily over time. But why would a protective charm against kainade become the deadly question posed by Aka Manto? One theory is that the legend inverted over time. What was once a way to protect yourself became the thing you had to protect yourself from. The question that keeps the monster away became the question that summons it. This kind of folkloric reversal is not uncommon. As stories pass from generation to generation, details shift. Protections become curses. Allies become enemies. The original meaning can be lost, leaving only the shape of the ritual behind. Part of this worship involved placing offerings at the toilet. In some regions, people would put paper dolls there, representations of human figures that could absorb impurities and negative energy. And here's the crucial detail. These paper dolls were often colored red and blue, or red and white, the exact colors that Aka Manto asks about, the exact colors that protected you from kainade. These dolls served an apotropaic function, meaning they were meant to ward off evil. Red was associated with blood and life force. White or blue were associated with purity and cleanliness. By placing these colored dolls at the toilet, you were creating a spiritual barrier, a boundary between the clean world of the living and the unclean realm of waste and death that existed below. The colors themselves had power. They were not arbitrary choices, but deeply meaningful symbols. Over time, as Japan modernized and these old customs faded, the meaning behind the colored dolls was forgotten, but the colors themselves remained in the cultural memory. They lingered in folklore, in stories, in the collective unconscious. And eventually, they found their way into the legend of Aka Manto. The protective red and blue became the deadly red and blue. The question that honored the toilet god became the question that summoned a demon. The sacred became profane. There's another toilet yokai worth mentioning in this context. Kurode, which means black hand. Like kainade, Kurode is a hand that emerges from the toilet. But Kurode is distinctly different in one key way. It's black or dark colored, and it's fuzzy or hairy. There's a famous story about a samurai who encountered Kurote. When the hairy black hand reached up to grab him, the samurai drew his sword and cut the hand off in a single strike. The hand fell into the toilet and disappeared, and the samurai was never bothered again. This story emphasizes something important. The old toilet yokai could be defeated. They could be outsmarted, avoided, or even physically harmed. They were frightening, yes, but they operated by comprehensible rules. If you were brave enough, smart enough, or quick enough, you could survive them. But Aka Manto is different. Aka Manto cannot be cut. He cannot be reasoned with. The only way to survive him is to refuse to engage with his question at all. And even that just buys you enough time to run. He represents an evolution in bathroom horror. Where the old yokai were obstacles, Aka Manto is an executioner. The transformation from these ancient spirits to the modern Aka Manto legend shows us something fascinating about how folklore evolves. Old beliefs don't simply disappear. They transform. They adapt to new contexts. The toilet god becomes a toilet demon. The protective colors become deadly choices. The mischievous hand becomes a strangling force. Each generation inherits the fears of the previous one, but reshapes them to reflect contemporary anxieties. In ancient times, people feared disease and contamination from poorly maintained toilets. That's why they worshipped kawayagami and followed elaborate purification rituals. In the early modern period, people feared the darkness and isolation of traditional toilet facilities, which were often separate buildings some distance from the main house. That's why yokai like Kainade and Kurote existed, to personify the danger of venturing alone into dark, unclean spaces. But by the 1930s, when Aka Manto emerged, the fear had changed again. Now people, especially children, feared not just physical danger, but psychological trauma. They feared making wrong choices, failing tests, disappointing others, being humiliated. And Aka Manto reflects that perfectly. He doesn't just harm your body. He forces you to participate in your own destruction by making you choose how you'll die. This is the genius of the Aka Manto legend. It took centuries of bathroom-related folklore, the red and blue colors from ancient purification rituals, the hand motif from yokai like Kainade and Kurote, the question format from protective charms, and the modern anxiety about impossible choices, and combined them all into a single, terrifying package. Aka Manto is not just one legend. He's the culmination of hundreds of years of evolving fears, all focused on a single, vulnerable moment in a school bathroom. And that's why the legend works. It's not arbitrary. Every element, from the colors to the location to the question itself, has deep roots in Japanese culture and history. When a child hears about Aka Manto, they're not just hearing a scary story. They're connecting, whether they know it or not, to centuries of tradition, to ancient gods and mischievous spirits, and the fundamental human fear of being alone in a vulnerable place. To understand why Aka Manto has remained so effective for nearly a century, we need to examine the psychological mechanism at the heart of the legend. The question itself: red paper or blue paper? On the surface, it seems simple, a binary choice. But in reality, it's a masterpiece of anxiety induction. It's a question designed to paralyze, to create maximum psychological distress in minimal words. Let's break down why it works so well. First, the question is asked when you are at your most vulnerable. You're sitting on a toilet. This is a moment when social masks are removed. You're alone with your body and its functions. There's an inherent embarrassment to this situation, even in private. The modern toilet stall is one of the last truly private spaces in our surveillance-saturated world. But that privacy is also isolation. No one can see you, which means no one can help you. And into this isolated vulnerability, a voice intrudes. The space you thought was private suddenly isn't. Someone or something is in there with you. Second, the question forces immediate engagement. It's not a threat. It's not a command. It's a polite request for a preference. Would you like red paper, or would you prefer blue? This rhetorical structure creates a false sense of agency. You're being given a choice, which implies freedom. But of course, it's not a real choice at all. Both options lead to death. The politeness of the question makes it even more sinister. Aka Manto isn't raging or obviously hostile. He's calm, reasonable, almost courteous. That creates a cognitive dissonance that's deeply unsettling. How can something asking so nicely intend such harm? Third, the question taps into a very specific fear common in Japanese culture, but recognized universally. The fear of giving the wrong answer when you don't know what the right answer is. Every student has experienced this. A teacher calls on you in class. You weren't paying attention or you don't understand the material, but you have to say something. You have to choose an answer. And you know that whatever you choose will be wrong, will lead to embarrassment, to failure, to consequences. Aka Manto's question is the nightmare version of that classroom experience. The stakes are no longer just social embarrassment. They're life and death. But the fundamental anxiety is the same. You must choose, and every choice is wrong. This connects to a broader aspect of Japanese cultural psychology. In Japanese society, there is often a correct answer that isn't immediately obvious. Social situations come with complex, unspoken rules. You're expected to read context, to understand implications, to know what's appropriate without being told explicitly. The concept of reading the air, or kuki wo yomu, is fundamental. You must sense what others are thinking and feeling, and adjust your behavior accordingly. If you fail to do this, if you give a response that violates these unspoken rules, you face social ostracism, shame, and profound discomfort. For children in school, this pressure is even more intense. They're constantly being judged by teachers, by parents, by peers. They're expected to know things they haven't been taught, to intuit correct behaviors, to avoid mistakes that could bring shame to themselves and their families. There's a psychological condition recognized in Japanese psychiatry called taijin kyofusho, which roughly translates to fear of interpersonal relations. It's a form of social anxiety disorder, but with a specifically Japanese character. Rather than fearing embarrassment to oneself, as in Western social anxiety, people with taijin kyofusho fear that their mere presence, their actions, their bodily functions might offend or disturb others. Imagine carrying that anxiety with you every day. The constant fear that you're doing something wrong, saying something wrong, being something wrong. And then imagine being alone in a bathroom, in the one place where you thought you could escape that judgment, and a voice asks you a question. You don't know what the question means. You don't know what answer is expected. But you know, with terrible certainty, that you will be judged on your answer. That consequences will follow. That there is a correct response. But you have no way of knowing what it is. That's what Aka Manto's question does. It crystallizes the anxiety of Japanese school life into a single moment. It's not just asking about toilet paper. It's asking, can you read the air? Do you understand the unspoken rules? Can you figure out what's expected of you without being told? And the answer, for most people, is no. You can't. Because the rules were designed to be incomprehensible. The question was designed to have no right answer. You are meant to fail. This is why simply refusing to answer, saying, "I don't need paper," works as an escape method in the legend. You're not playing the game. You're rejecting the premise of the question entirely. It's the equivalent of standing up in class when the teacher asks an impossible question and saying, "I refuse to answer that." This test is unfair. In the real world, that kind of defiance is socially unacceptable. But in the legend, in the supernatural space of Aka Manto's bathroom, it's the only thing that saves you. The legend is almost instructive in that sense. It teaches children that when faced with an impossible situation, sometimes the only winning move is to walk away. When Aka Manto asks you to choose between red and blue, he's asking you to choose between two different modes of death, violent and bloody, or cold and suffocating, active trauma versus passive surrender. In some interpretations, this represents different fears about death itself. Do you fear a quick, brutal end, or a slow, inexorable one? Do you want to go out fighting, covered in your own blood? Or do you want to slip away quietly, your body going cold and blue? The question makes you confront your own mortality and decide which version of death you would prefer, if forced to choose. And there's no right answer, because death, in any form, is the wrong answer. Some researchers have also noted that the color choice in the legend may relate to an old Japanese academic tradition. In Japanese schools, when teachers grade tests, incorrect answers are marked in red ink. A test covered in red marks is called akaten, which literally means red marks. Students used to take their failed red-marked tests and flush them down the toilet out of frustration and shame, trying to hide the evidence of their failure. The toilet became a repository for academic humiliation. Following this interpretation, in the Aka Manto legend, red paper leads to a red death covered in blood. It's as if the shame of failure has been literalized. The red marks that covered your test now cover your body. Your inability to find the right answer has been made flesh. This reading represents one scholarly interpretation, though it's worth noting that many versions of Aka Manto specifically haunt schools rather than other public spaces. He doesn't typically appear in shopping mall bathrooms or train station facilities in the traditional tellings. He targets school bathrooms, the ones students use, the ones where academic and social pressures are most intense. This pattern suggests he's deeply intertwined with the school environment, as much a part of that world as tests and grades and peer judgment. And like those other aspects of school life, he asks questions you cannot answer correctly. The question also works on a more primal level. It forces you to make a choice under pressure. When you're sitting on a toilet, you're not in a state of high cognitive function. You're relaxed, distracted, focused on bodily needs. Your guard is down. And suddenly, you must make a critical decision. This activates a stress response. Your brain floods with adrenaline. Fight or flight kicks in. But you can't fight a voice with no body. And you can't flee because you're literally sitting down with your pants around your ankles. You're trapped. So your brain loops, trying to find an answer, trying to escape, trying to do something, anything. And in that moment of frozen panic, Aka Manto strikes. This is sophisticated psychological horror. It's not about jump scares or gore, though those elements are present. It's about creating a situation where the victim participates in their own demise. You kill yourself by answering. Your voice, your choice, your words become the trigger for your death. And you cannot remain silent because the question hangs in the air, demanding a response. Humans are hardwired to answer questions posed to them directly. It's a social reflex. When someone asks you something, you reply. It takes conscious effort to not respond. And when you're already in a state of fear and vulnerability, that conscious effort becomes nearly impossible. So the question works on multiple levels. Culturally, it activates anxieties about social performance and hidden rules. Psychologically, it creates a no-win scenario that induces panic. Symbolically, it forces you to confront different forms of death and choose your own fate. And mechanically, it traps you through a combination of physical vulnerability and social conditioning. It's a perfectly designed piece of horror, refined over decades of retelling until every word, every pause, every implication works in concert to produce maximum fear. And that's why children still tell this story. That's why, even in an age of indoor plumbing and modern facilities, even in schools with well-lit, clean bathrooms, the legend of Aka Manto persists. Because the question he asks is not really about toilet paper. It's about all the impossible questions we face in life. All the times we're asked to choose when we don't have enough information. All the moments when we're judged and found wanting, and we don't even know what standard we're being measured against. Aka Manto gives form to that formless anxiety. He makes it concrete. He gives it a voice. And that voice asks, forever and always, red paper or blue paper? You can hear the question now, can't you? Echoing in your mind. And even though you know it's just a story, even though you know the right answer is to refuse both options, part of you wonders. If you really heard that voice, alone in a bathroom stall, what would you do? What would you say? To fully understand Aka Manto's place in Japanese folklore, we must examine the space he haunts. The school bathroom is not just a setting. It's an essential component of the legend's power. Japanese school bathrooms, particularly older ones, have a unique character that Western audiences might not fully appreciate. They're different from the clean, well-lit facilities you might find in a modern American school. Let me take you inside one of these spaces so you can understand why they became such fertile ground for horror. Picture an older Japanese school building. The hallways are wide, with windows on one side letting in natural light. The floors are polished wood or smooth tile. Everything is clean, maintained by the students themselves as part of their daily duties. But walk to the end of the hall, turn a corner, and you'll find yourself approaching the bathroom. The atmosphere changes immediately. The air grows cooler. There's a smell, not quite unpleasant, but definitely noticeable. A mixture of water, old pipes, and industrial cleaner. The lighting is dimmer here, away from the main hall's windows. Push open the door. The traditional school bathroom often has no interior door on individual stalls, just a row of squat toilets separated by low walls. These are the traditional Japanese toilets, essentially porcelain holes in the floor, with footpads on either side. You squat over them, and when you're done, you flush. The design is ancient and practical, but it creates a very different experience from sitting on a Western toilet. You're closer to the ground. The position is more exposed, less stable. And when you look down into that hole, it seems to go down forever into darkness. These older bathrooms are often located in less trafficked parts of the school, away from the main classrooms, near the gymnasium or the back entrance. They're the facilities that get used less often, which means they're not as well maintained as the main bathrooms. The tiles might be cracked. There might be stains on the walls that no amount of scrubbing can remove. The windows, if there are any, are small and high up, covered with frosted glass that lets in only a gray, diffused light. During the day, these bathrooms are unpleasant. At night, or in the late afternoon when most students have gone home, they become genuinely eerie. Japanese schools have a practice of having students stay late for club activities. If you're in the basketball club, or the tea ceremony club, or any number of extracurricular groups, you might be at school until 6 or 7 in the evening. The sun sets, the building empties out. And if you need to use the bathroom, you might find yourself walking down those darkening hallways, pushing open that bathroom door, entering that cold, echoing space, alone. That's when the fears come. That's when you remember the stories about Hanako-san in the third stall of the third floor, about Aka Manto in the last stall of any bathroom, about all the spirits and ghosts and impossible things that supposedly haunt these liminal spaces. And suddenly, the ordinary act of using the toilet becomes fraught with supernatural dread. There's also a specific architectural feature that amplifies this fear. Many traditional Japanese school bathrooms have a fourth stall, and in Japanese, the number 4, shi, is a homophone for death. Shi. It's considered extremely unlucky. Buildings often skip the fourth floor entirely, going from 3 to 5. Room numbers avoid 4 when possible, and yet, in bathrooms, there's often a fourth stall. This stall is frequently avoided. Students use the first, second, or third stalls. The fourth sits empty, waiting, and according to numerous versions of Aka Manto, it's the fourth stall he prefers. The stall associated with death, the one everyone avoids. That's where he waits. This creates a self-reinforcing cycle. Because students avoid the fourth stall, it sees less use. It becomes dustier, slightly more unkempt. This makes it even more unappealing, so people avoid it even more. It becomes the forgotten stall, the isolated stall, the stall that feels different from the others. And that difference, that slight wrongness, becomes fertile ground for legend. Of course that's where the ghost is. Of course that's where the monster waits. Look at it. It's obviously cursed. But Aka Manto's association with school bathrooms goes deeper than just architecture and atmosphere. Schools themselves occupy a complex psychological space for children. They're places of learning, but also of anxiety, of social bonding, but also of bullying and exclusion, of structure and safety, but also of constant evaluation and judgment. Schools are where you spend most of your childhood, and they're where many of your deepest fears and traumas originate. This dual nature makes the bathroom perfect for ghost stories. It's a necessary space you cannot avoid using, but it's also a space that makes you uncomfortable and exposed. You have to go there, but you don't want to. That tension, that push and pull between necessity and fear, creates the exact conditions for horror to thrive. If Aka Manto haunted, say, the science lab, you could simply not go there. Most students never need to enter the science lab outside of class. But the bathroom? Everyone needs the bathroom. You can't avoid it forever. Eventually, you'll have to go there. And when you do, when you push open that stall door, will Aka Manto be waiting? The legend also reflects changes in Japanese school culture. In the 1930s, when Aka Manto first appeared, schools were becoming more regimented and militaristic. Students were expected to conform, to suppress individuality, to serve the collective. The bathroom was one of the few places where that rigid structure temporarily loosened, and into that loosening, the legend places a monster, as if to say, even here, even in this brief moment of privacy and physical relief, you are not safe. The demands and dangers of the world follow you everywhere. As decades passed and Japanese education evolved, becoming more focused on academic achievement and exam performance, the legend adapted. Aka Manto came to represent academic pressure as much as military conformity. The impossible choice he offers mirrors the impossible standards students face. Study this subject or that subject, knowing you don't have time for both. Choose this high school or that high school, knowing your entire future might hinge on the decision. Take this test, answer these questions, make these choices, and know that failure means social death, if not literal death. Aka Manto's red and blue paper becomes a stand-in for the red marks of failure and the blue despair of academic inadequacy. There's also a gendered dimension worth examining in the legend. While Aka Manto appears in both male and female bathrooms in different versions, he has a particular association with haunting female bathrooms. Some tellings describe him as specifically targeting girls. This introduces an additional layer of fear related to vulnerability and violation. For a young girl alone in a bathroom, the appearance of a male presence, even a supernatural one, carries implications of sexual threat. The legend never makes this explicit, but it's there in the subtext. A masked man hiding in the last stall, asking intimate questions to girls in a state of undress. The horror is not just about the violence of red or blue deaths, but about the invasion of private space by a male entity. This aspect of the legend may reflect broader societal anxieties about the safety of girls in public spaces. Japanese schools have worked hard to create safe environments, but the fear persists that danger can infiltrate even the most protected spaces. In this reading, Aka Manto, in his targeting of female bathrooms, embodies that fear. He's the predator who shouldn't be able to get in, but somehow does anyway. He represents the idea that no space is truly safe, that privacy can always be violated, that danger lurks even in the most mundane locations. Interestingly, some modern versions of Aka Manto have expanded beyond school bathrooms. There are stories of him appearing in train station bathrooms, in department store restrooms, in any public facility that's old enough or isolated enough to feel slightly wrong. This expansion shows the legend's adaptability. As public restrooms have become more common and more standardized, Aka Manto has moved with the times, finding new hunting grounds in the gaps of modern infrastructure. Anywhere there's a bathroom that's poorly lit, rarely used, or just slightly unsettling, Aka Manto might be waiting. But schools remain his primary domain. And there's something deeply appropriate about that. Schools are where we learn the rules of society, where we're taught what's expected of us, how to behave, what to value. They're institutions of enculturation, turning children into functional members of the social order. But they're also where we learn that we don't always fit, that we can't always meet expectations, that sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we'll be found wanting, we'll be judged, we'll fail. And in the bathroom of that educational institution, in the one space where you're briefly free from observation and judgment, Aka Manto waits to teach you the final lesson, that there is no escape, that choices have consequences, that failure is lethal. That even when you think you're alone, something is watching, something is waiting, and something will ask you a question you cannot answer correctly. The haunted school bathroom, with Aka Manto in its last stall, is more than just a spooky setting. It's a symbol, a physical manifestation of all the pressures, anxieties, and impossible expectations that define Japanese school life. It's where the individual confronts the inescapable judgment of authority, distilled down to a single supernatural encounter. And that's why the legend persists. That's why, even in modern schools, with bright LED lighting and automatic faucets and doors that lock securely, students still whisper about the last stall, still dare each other to go in there, still listen for a voice asking about red paper or blue paper. Red paper or blue paper? The question echoes through 90 years of Japanese school history, and it will continue to echo as long as children are afraid. Part 9. The Ghost Girl in the Third Stall. Before we can complete our understanding of Aka Manto, we must acknowledge his most famous companion in bathroom horror. Because while Aka Manto may be the oldest, he is not the most well-known. That distinction belongs to a young girl in a red dress with a bobbed haircut who died far too young and far too violently. Her name is Hanako-san, and while she and Aka Manto haunt the same spaces, they represent very different kinds of fear. Hanako-san, also known as Toire no Hanako-san, or Hanako of the Toilet, first appeared in Japanese folklore in the 1950s. While Aka Manto dates back to the 1930s, making him the older legend, Hanako-san became widespread later, primarily in the 1980s and 1990s, when she achieved near universal recognition among Japanese schoolchildren. According to the legend, Hanako-san is the ghost of a young girl who haunts the third stall on the third floor of elementary school girls' bathrooms. The repetition of threes is significant in Japanese numerology and folklore, marking this as a space of spiritual power. To summon Hanako-san, the ritual is specific. You must go to the third floor of your school, to the girls' bathroom, and approach the third stall. You knock 3 times on the door. Then you ask, "Hanako-san, are you there?" If she's present, you'll hear a small, childlike voice respond, "Yes, I am." If you open the door after hearing this response, you'll see her. A young girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, wearing a red dress or skirt, with her hair cut in a traditional style. And then, depending on the version of the story, she'll pull you into the toilet, dragging you down to hell or some other terrible fate. The origins of Hanako-san, like most urban legends, are murky and contradictory. Some versions say she was a victim of World War II bombing, a girl playing hide-and-seek in the school bathroom when the air raid sirens went off. She hid in the third stall, but the sirens were too loud, or maybe she couldn't hear them. She stayed hidden while everyone else evacuated to the bomb shelter. When the bombs hit the school, she was killed instantly. Her spirit, confused and frightened, remained in the place where she died, still hiding, still waiting for the game of hide and seek to end. Other versions are darker. They say she was murdered by an abusive parent or by a stranger who found her alone in the bathroom. She was beaten or stabbed or strangled. Her body was left in the third stall. When she was found, days later, her red dress was still recognizable, despite everything that had been done to her. Now her ghost haunts that same stall, replaying her death, or seeking revenge, or simply unable to move on. Still other tellings claim Hanako-san died by suicide. She was bullied relentlessly at school. Children can be cruel in ways that adults forget or never fully comprehend. The bathroom was the only place she could escape to, the only place where she could be alone with her pain. Eventually, it became too much. She took her own life in the third stall of the third-floor bathroom. And because she died there, in that specific place, her spirit is trapped there. She can never leave. She can only wait, hoping that someone will hear her voice, will acknowledge her existence, will remember that she was once a real girl with real feelings. Comparing Hanako-san to Aka Manto reveals fascinating differences in how Japanese culture processes fear through folklore. He is explicitly a victim. She's a child who suffered and died. Her presence is tragic before it's terrifying. When children summon her, they're engaging with grief and innocence lost. She represents the fear that something terrible could happen to you, that you could die suddenly and pointlessly, that your childhood could be cut short by violence or disaster. She's the ghost of every child who ever felt alone and afraid in a school bathroom, taken to its ultimate conclusion. This difference in agency creates different types of horror. Hanako-san is horror through pathos. You're scared of her because of what happened to her and what she might do to you in her confusion and pain. Aka Manto is horror through malice. You're scared of him because of what he wants to do to you, deliberately and with full awareness. Hanako-san might be reasoned with in some versions. You can escape her by showing her something she hates, like a perfect test score or a carton of school lunch milk. She's still connected enough to her living self to have preferences and aversions. Aka Manto cannot be reasoned with. He has no preferences beyond his question. He is the question, and the question is all. Gender plays a role in this distinction as well. Hanako-san is a little girl, and the legend treats her with a mixture of fear and pity appropriate to a child victim. She's scary, but also sad. Aka Manto is an adult male, and the legend treats him as purely threatening. There's no invitation to sympathize with him. The cultural coding is clear. Female ghosts, especially child ghosts, can be tragic as well as terrifying. Male ghosts, especially adult male ghosts, are primarily threatening. This reflects broader cultural narratives about vulnerability and danger, about who is typically a victim and who is typically a perpetrator. Temporally, the two legends also arose in different contexts. Hanako-san emerged in the 1950s, in the immediate aftermath of World War II. Japan was rebuilding, processing collective trauma, dealing with the loss of a generation of children who died in the war. Hanako-san, as a war victim, makes sense in that context. She's one of the many children who died, given a specific form and location, but representing all of them. When you summon Hanako-san, you're acknowledging that dead children exist in the spaces where living children play. You're refusing to forget the war's youngest victims. Aka Manto, originating in the 1930s, predates the war. He comes from a different era of anxiety, one focused on modernization, social control, and the pressures of an increasingly militaristic educational system. He doesn't represent war dead. He represents the grinding, suffocating pressure of conformity and impossible expectations. By the time Hanako-san became popular in the 1980s, Japan had transformed into an economic powerhouse with an intensely competitive education system. But both legends could coexist because they addressed different fears. Hanako-san, the fear of sudden violence and lost innocence. Aka Manto, the fear of sustained psychological pressure and inevitable failure. Interestingly, the two legends rarely interact in the folklore. They haunt the same spaces, school bathrooms, but they occupy different niches. Hanako-san is specific about location: third floor, third stall. Aka Manto is more flexible, appearing in various bathrooms, though he prefers older, less used ones, and especially the fourth stall. This spatial separation allows both legends to coexist without contradicting each other. You could, theoretically, summon Hanako-san on the third floor and then go downstairs and encounter Aka Manto in the second floor bathroom. They're part of the same ecosystem of school bathroom horror, but they don't compete for the same territory. There are a few versions, though relatively rare and likely modern innovations, where Hanako-san is explicitly mentioned as an assistant or companion to Aka Manto. In these less common tellings, if you try to escape Aka Manto by choosing a color other than red or blue, Hanako-san appears and drags you to hell through the toilet. She becomes his enforcer, ensuring that rule breakers are punished. This appears to be a contemporary blending of the two legends, likely emerging as both became more widely known and storytellers began to mix them together. It makes a kind of narrative sense, adding another layer of wrongness to the horror by suggesting that Hanako-san's innocence has been corrupted, or that even victims can become complicit with evil given enough time and anger. But in most versions, Hanako-san and Aka Manto remain separate. They're 2 points on a spectrum of bathroom horror. Hanako-san at one end, young, tragic, potentially sympathetic. Aka Manto at the other end, ageless, malicious, utterly unsympathetic. Between them is a range of other bathroom yokai and ghosts, each occupying their own niche, each representing different fears. There's Kashima Reiko, the legless woman who asks where her legs are. There's Teke Teke, the girl cut in half by a train who drags herself with her hands. There's the countless variations on hands reaching up from toilets, faces appearing in mirrors, voices calling from empty stalls. Aka Manto has not been domesticated. In nearly every adaptation, he remains a threat. When he appears in video games, he's a boss to be avoided or defeated, never a friend. When he shows up in horror movies, he's the monster, not the misunderstood victim. His question red paper or blue paper, has become shorthand for an impossible choice with deadly consequences. It's referenced in contexts far removed from Japanese school bathrooms. The Korean TV show Squid Game used red and blue tiles as part of its recruitment process, and the director confirmed this was an explicit reference to Aka Manto. The choice of colors, the binary decision, the deadly stakes. These elements have been abstracted from the original legend and applied to new contexts. This speaks to the fundamental power of Aka Manto as a concept. He's not just a Japanese urban legend. He's a framework for understanding certain types of psychological horror. The forced choice, the no-win scenario, the calm, polite voice asking you to choose your own manner of death. These are universal fears, even if they're expressed through culturally specific imagery. You don't need to know about Japanese school bathrooms or toilet gods or the history of the blue blanket murders to understand why Aka Manto is scary. The core of the legend translates across cultures because it taps into something fundamental about human psychology. Hanako-san and Aka Manto together represent the yin and yang of bathroom horror. One is the victim become ghost. The other is the predator become demon. One invites sympathy even as she frightens you. The other invites only fear. One can be appeased, avoided, or escaped through knowledge and clever action. The other can only be fled from. They're complementary horrors, each highlighting what the other lacks, each necessary to fully understand the landscape of terror that Japanese children navigate every time they push open a bathroom door. And both will outlive us. They've already persisted far longer than the individuals who first told their stories. They'll be passed down to new generations, adapted to new contexts, remixed into new forms. Because the fears they represent, vulnerability and victimization, impossible choices and inevitable failure, these fears never truly go away. As long as children feel unsafe in bathrooms, as long as students face pressures they cannot escape, these legends will endure. Hanako-san in her third stall, Aka Manto in his fourth, both waiting, both watching, both ready to ask their questions. Are you there, Hanako-san? Red paper or blue paper? Part 10. Beyond the Bathroom Door. Modern Manifestations. As we move deeper into the 21st century, Aka Manto has not faded into obscurity like so many folkloric figures before him. Instead, he has evolved, spreading beyond the oral tradition of schoolyard whispers into a vast array of modern media. From video games to television shows, from viral internet stories to contemporary films, Aka Manto continues to haunt new generations through new mediums. Let's explore how this nearly century-old legend has adapted to our digital age. The transition of folklore into popular media is a well-documented phenomenon. Stories that once lived only in the telling become codified in books, movies, games. Sometimes this transition kills the legend, making it too fixed, too well-known, stripping away the uncertainty that makes folklore frightening. But sometimes, as with Aka Manto, the transition amplifies the legend's power. Each new adaptation introduces the story to audiences who might never have heard it otherwise, spreading the fear across borders and generations. One of the earliest anime appearances of Aka Manto was in the 2000 series Ghost Stories, known in Japanese as Gaku no Kaidan. This show featured various Japanese urban legends and yokai, dedicating an entire episode to a character called Akagami Aogami, or red paper, blue paper. In the episode, the monster terrorizes a school, and the protagonists must figure out how to stop it. The show was relatively faithful to the legend, maintaining the bathroom setting and the deadly binary choice. Interestingly, the English dub of Ghost Stories is infamous for taking extreme liberties with the script, turning a straightforward horror show into a surreal comedy. But even in that heavily altered form, the core of Aka Manto's legend, the question and its consequences, remained frightening. The year 2015 brought Aka Manto to American television through the show Scream Queens. In the episode titled Ghost Stories, one of the characters, played by Niecy Nash, tells the legend of the Red Cloak to a group of sorority girls gathered around a campfire. The retelling is fairly accurate to the Japanese original, maintaining the bathroom setting and the choice between red and blue. The scene functions as both a horror moment and a commentary on cultural differences in urban legends. It introduced Aka Manto to an American audience that likely had never heard of him, demonstrating the legend's transportability across cultures. But perhaps the most significant recent video game adaptation came in 2019, when the horror game developer Chilla's Art released Aka Manto on Steam. This first-person survival horror game puts the player in the role of a student exploring an abandoned school haunted by Aka Manto. The game maintains the PS1 era aesthetic of early survival horror games, using low-resolution textures and limited visibility to create an atmosphere of pervasive dread. Players must navigate the school's bathrooms while avoiding Aka Manto, who appears as a tall figure in a red cloak with a white mask. What's particularly interesting about Chilla's Art's interpretation is that it adds a backstory. Aka Manto was once a real student named Atsushi, who died in the school. Audio logs scattered throughout the game reveal his story, humanizing the monster while not diminishing his threat. The game also adds additional elements to the legend, including white floating masks that alert Aka Manto to the player's location, and a giant centipede that stalks the school's air vents. These additions expand the mythology while remaining true to the spirit of the original legend. When Aka Manto catches the player, he kills them with a knife, a more direct and less supernaturally elaborate death than the traditional legend, but one that maintains the same outcome. You made the wrong choice, and now you're dead. The game was successful enough that it introduced many Western players to Aka Manto for the first time. YouTube channels dedicated to horror gaming covered the game extensively, and through those videos, the legend spread even further. Comment sections filled with people discussing the real folklore behind the game, sharing their own experiences with the legend, and comparing different versions they'd heard. The game became a vector for the legend itself, carrying it beyond the gaming community into broader internet horror culture. In 2021, the South Korean television phenomenon Squid Game made what may be the most widely seen reference to Aka Manto in modern media. The show's director, Hwang Dong-hyuk, confirmed in interviews that the use of red and blue tiles in the show's recruitment process was a direct homage to the Aka Manto legend. In the show, a mysterious recruiter offers potential players a chance to win money by choosing between a red and a blue tile in a game of dedakji. Unlike the legend, the choice doesn't affect the outcome. Both colors lead to the same invitation to the deadly games. But the visual and thematic echoes are unmistakable. The binary choice, the colors, the sense that you're being tested by something dangerous. Squid Game, watched by millions globally, inadvertently exposed much of the world to Aka Manto's central motif, even if most viewers didn't recognize the reference. That same year, another Korean drama, Hotel del Luna, featured a more explicit Aka Manto reference. In the 9th episode, a ghost appears in the hotel, asking if the owner prefers red or blue toilet paper. The owner, annoyed, remarks on how long this particular ghost has been asking that question, noting that he heard this legend when he was a child. The scene plays the reference for dark comedy rather than horror, but it demonstrates how deeply Aka Manto has penetrated Korean popular culture despite originating in Japan. The 2023 indie horror game World of Horror includes Aka Manto as a boss encounter. World of Horror is explicitly designed as a love letter to Japanese horror manga, particularly the work of Junji Ito, and it includes numerous Japanese urban legends and yokai. The game's presentation is intentionally lo-fi, using 1-bit graphics reminiscent of old Macintosh computers. When you encounter Aka Manto in the game, you must make choices that determine whether you survive. The game maintains the question structure of the original legend, while adapting it to a turn-based RPG format. Beyond these major appearances, Aka Manto shows up in countless smaller ways across media. He's referenced in manga, parodied in comedy anime, discussed on horror podcasts, featured in educational videos about world folklore. There's even a Japanese idol whose entire persona is based on Hanako-san, and her music videos occasionally reference Aka Manto as well, creating a cross-pollination between the two bathroom legends. The internet has also given rise to countless text-based adaptations of the legend, particularly on sites dedicated to creepypasta, internet horror stories. Some of these retellings are faithful to the original legend. Others modernize it, placing Aka Manto in contemporary settings like shopping mall bathrooms or office buildings. A few particularly creative versions have him appearing in hotel bathrooms, targeting travelers who don't know the legend and therefore don't know how to escape. These variations demonstrate the legend's flexibility. The core, the question, and the deadly choices can be transplanted to any bathroom anywhere, and it still works. What's remarkable about all these adaptations is how consistent they remain with the original legend. Unlike some folklore that gets radically reinterpreted in modern media, Aka Manto stays true to his origins. He's still in bathrooms. He's still wearing red. He's still asking about red and blue. The fundamental structure of the legend proves resistant to major changes. This suggests that the legend is already in its ideal form. The storytelling is so efficient, so precisely calibrated to generate fear, that attempts to significantly alter it only weaken it. However, there have been interesting variations in how different media handle the escape mechanism. In the traditional legend, refusing both colors allows you to flee. But in many modern adaptations, this escape isn't always available. Video games, in particular, often require the player to defeat Aka Manto through other means, finding items or solving puzzles. This is partially a necessity of game design. You need to give the player something to do beyond just saying no and running away. But it also reflects a modern sensibility that problems should have solutions, that clever thinking and preparation can overcome any threat. The original legend is more nihilistic. There's no defeating Aka Manto. There's only refusing to engage with him and hoping you're fast enough to get away. The spread of Aka Manto through modern media has also led to interesting cross-cultural conversations. Western horror fans, encountering the legend through games or shows, often compare it to their own bathroom-related folklore. Bloody Mary, the mirror ghost, gets mentioned frequently. So does Candyman. The comparison highlights interesting cultural differences. Western bathroom horror tends to involve mirrors and reflection, seeing something you shouldn't see. Japanese bathroom horror tends to involve voices and choices, hearing something you shouldn't hear and being forced to respond. Both tap into bathroom vulnerability, but they approach it from different angles. Some cultural critics have noted that Aka Manto's recent surge in international recognition coincides with growing global interest in Japanese horror more broadly. The success of movies like Ringu, The Ring, and Ju-on, The Grudge, in the late 1990s and early 2000s created an appetite for Japanese horror that continues to this day. Western audiences became familiar with certain aesthetics and tropes: long black hair, pale ghosts, curses that spread like contagion, horror that emphasizes psychological dread over gore. Aka Manto fits into this aesthetic while predating most of it. He's proto-J-horror, a legend that established many of the patterns later horror would follow. The digital age has also allowed for a phenomenon that would have been impossible in earlier eras: the immediate, global sharing of personal experiences with the legend. Social media platforms host thousands of posts from people claiming to have encountered Aka Manto, or something like him, in real life. These accounts vary wildly in credibility. Some are obvious fiction, creative writing exercises shared as entertainment. Others are more ambiguous, written with enough detail and sincerity that they might be genuine experiences, or at least genuine belief in experiences. One common pattern in these accounts is the witness claiming they heard the question but didn't see Aka Manto himself. They were alone in a public bathroom usually late at night. They heard a male voice ask about red or blue paper. They fled without answering. These stories often include specific details about the location, the time, the witness's emotional state. Whether true or not, they serve to keep the legend alive in a new form. They're modern folklore, transmitted at the speed of the internet, mixing traditional storytelling with contemporary platforms. There are also accounts from people who claim to have attempted the summoning ritual, deliberately trying to call Aka Manto. These are usually teenagers, motivated by the same impulses that drive people to play with Ouija boards or try to summon Bloody Mary. They go to an old bathroom, preferably one with a reputation for being haunted. They enter the last stall. They call out, asking for red or blue paper. And then they claim something happened. A voice responded, or the lights flickered, or they felt an overwhelming sense of dread, or in most cases, nothing happened, and they laughed it off as superstition. But the willingness to try, the fact that people still attempt to summon Aka Manto nearly a century after the legend began, speaks to its enduring power. It's not just a story you hear, it's a story you can test. And that testability, even if the test usually fails, keeps the legend vibrant. Every failed summoning doesn't disprove Aka Manto. It just means he wasn't there that time, or you didn't do it right, or you were lucky. The legend is structured in a way that makes it essentially unfalsifiable, and that's one of the secrets to its longevity. As we look at Aka Manto's presence across modern media and digital spaces, we see a legend that has successfully navigated the transition from oral tradition to mass media without losing its essential character. He's been in anime, video games, live-action TV, horror literature, and countless internet discussions. He's crossed language barriers, appearing in English, Korean, and other languages beyond his original Japanese. He's been explained, analyzed, dissected, and adapted. And yet, he remains fundamentally the same. A figure in red, a white mask, a terrible question, 2 colors, 2 deaths. And as long as there are bathrooms, as long as there are moments of vulnerability and solitude, as long as people fear making the wrong choice, Aka Manto will continue to haunt both the physical spaces of school bathrooms and the cultural spaces of our collective imagination. He is a legend for the ages, modernized but never made obsolete, adapted but never fundamentally changed. In the end, that's perhaps the most impressive thing about Aka Manto. He doesn't need updating. The horror he represents is timeless. The anxiety he embodies is universal. You can put him in a video game, you can reference him in a Korean drama, you can write creepypasta about him, and he always works. Because the question he asks is a question we're all afraid of, in one form or another. What do you choose when every choice is wrong? What do you do when you're alone and vulnerable and something is demanding an answer? How do you escape from a situation designed to be inescapable? Red paper or blue paper? The question has been asked for 90 years, and it will be asked for 90 more. Part 11. The Eternal Question. We've traveled through 90 years of terror, from the schoolyards of 1935 Osaka to the digital spaces of modern social media, from ancient toilet gods to contemporary video games. We've examined the blue blanket murders, dissected the psychological mechanisms of impossible choices, compared Aka Manto to his fellow bathroom haunter Hanako-san, and traced his spread through global popular culture. We've looked at the legend from every angle, in all its variations, across all its adaptations. And yet, Aka Manto remains as mysterious and frightening as ever. Because at its core, this legend isn't about toilet paper or school bathrooms or even Japan specifically. It's about something deeper and more universal. It's about the moment when we realize that we don't have control, that our choices don't matter, that we're vulnerable in ways we can't defend against. Every culture has these moments, these recognition of helplessness. For Japanese students in the 1930s, it was the bathroom stall in the late afternoon, the question with no right answer. For us today, it might be different spaces, different questions, but the fundamental experience is the same. The moment when you understand that you're alone, that danger is present, and that nothing you do will make it go away. Aka Manto has endured because he represents that moment perfectly. He is the embodiment of anxiety. Not the mild worry about a test or the social discomfort of an awkward interaction, but the deep, existential anxiety that comes from recognizing that the universe doesn't care about your preferences, your comfort, or your survival. You can be the best student, the most prepared person, the most careful and cautious individual, and still, a voice will ask you to choose, and your choice will be wrong. This is why the legend can't be defeated by modern conveniences. Newer bathrooms with better lighting don't stop Aka Manto, nor do cell phones, security cameras, or any other contemporary safety measures. Because Aka Manto isn't really in the bathroom, he's in your head. He's the voice of every impossible expectation, every unfair judgment, every situation where you were set up to fail. He's the manifestation of systemic pressures that cannot be fought with individual actions. The legend of Aka Manto will persist as long as people, especially young people, feel trapped by circumstances beyond their control, as long as education systems create anxiety, as long as social hierarchies create vulnerability, as long as there are spaces where individuals are alone and exposed and afraid. The bathroom is just a symbol. Aka Manto himself is just a form. But the fear he represents, the psychological truth at the center of the legend, that will never fade. So the next time you're alone in a bathroom, particularly an older one, particularly in the late afternoon when the light is fading, you might remember this story. You might remember the figure in red, waiting in the last stall. You might remember the question that has no right answer. And you might wonder, just for a moment, if you're really alone. And if you hear a voice, calm and polite, asking about colored paper, remember what the legend teaches. Don't answer red. Don't answer blue. Don't try to be clever with yellow or green or any other color. Just say no. Say, I don't need any paper. And then run. Run as fast as you can. Get out of that bathroom. Get back to people, to light, to safety. Because Aka Manto is patient. He's been asking his question for nearly 100 years. He's asked it in thousands of bathrooms, in dozens of variations, in countless moments of vulnerability. And he'll keep asking it for 100 years more. He doesn't tire. He doesn't age. He doesn't give up. He waits in the last stall, behind his white mask, under his red cloak, ready to ask his eternal question. And someday, perhaps, someone will find an answer that breaks the curse. Someday, someone will say the right thing, do the right thing, make the choice that changes the legend. But until that day, the question remains, the choice remains, the horror remains. Red paper or blue paper? Choose wisely. If there's such a thing as wisdom in a rigged game, if there's such a thing as survival in a question designed to kill. The stall door is closed, the bathroom is quiet, the light is dim, and somewhere, in some school, in some city, in some moment of vulnerable solitude, a voice is asking its question right now, has been asking it, will always be asking it. Red paper or blue paper? That's the complete story of Aka Manto, the red cloak, the demon of the bathroom, the asker of impossible questions. He's been haunting Japanese schools since the 1930s. He's spread across the world through media and internet and the universal language of fear. And he's not going anywhere. Because the fear he represents is fundamental, eternal. As long as there are children who feel afraid, as long as there are impossible choices, as long as there are bathrooms where you're alone with your thoughts and your vulnerabilities, aka Manto will wait. And ask. And wait. And ask. Forever. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into one of Japan's most terrifying urban legends. If you enjoyed this exploration into the dark corners of folklore and horror, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more legends to explore. The world is full of fear, both ancient and modern, and we're here to guide you through it, one nightmare at a time. Or the blue.